This is TWiT.
I kind of want to talk about Fuchsia because there's some Fuchsia news.
Stacey has things to say about that too.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot to say, but yes, tell us about it, Leo.
So Google, according to 9 to 5 Google, is proposing a way. Fuchsia is their next generation operating system, which they recently open sourced and asked for contributors. They are proposing a way for Fuchsia to run Android and Linux apps natively. So Fuchsia is not Linux, but wouldn't it be cool if you had an operating system that could run unmodified Android and Linux apps? It sounds to me
it's not running a shell of Android.
No VM. No.
Natively to no VM.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Oh.
So it's all doing this natively, and I think this is really cool because it's really interesting, and I'm sorry, it's interesting for the IoT because a lot of IoT devices, they either run Linux or they run Android, and there are pros and cons to doing each. So, but I don't know how it does it, and that's what I was curious about.
Yeah.
I think this would be
Starnix.
cool, but for a tiny group of people. Even though we have all of this IoT stuff out there, having Linux capability running on your phone, I don't know how well that's going to make a difference.
Other way
with
around,
IoT devices.
So imagine instead
yeah.
of buying a Chromebook, which runs Chrome OS, and you can get Linux running on Chrome OS, and you can get Android apps, but instead of doing that, running some new computing device running Fuchsia, not a phone, but it can run your phone's apps, and it can run Linux apps. And you're probably right. This is not an... I don't know what Google's intent.
It's not consumer, but...
It's not an end-user thing. Yeah, I think you're right.
But cars, a lot of cars pulled in Android and built things on Android. A lot of appliance makers use it. Medical device makers are looking at it instead of Windows. So what there's a whole generation of computing that's going to be coming online that needs an OS that can last for a long time, that can that has popular support, but isn't as proprietary as Windows, if that makes sense. And this sounds really compelling, maybe. I mean, and the other thing is they've been building this. I mean, we first heard about Fuchsia in 2011. Is that right? It was a long time ago.
That long?
It's been a while. Yeah.
Maybe not that long.
So the other thing I think is important and interesting is this is one of the first contributions since Google opened up Fuchsia to the general populace. So this is at googlesource.com. And by the way, this is merely a proposal. Here's the document.
Yes.
This document proposes a mechanism for running unmodified Linux programs on Fuchsia. They're running a user space process whose system interface is compatible with the Linux ABI. So it doesn't use the Linux kernel. It implements the interface in the Starnix, which you mentioned. Starnix, which is a compatibility layer. So it's not emulation, but it is a translation layer. Maybe more like Wine.
Yeah, there's some sort of abstraction in there, and I don't know. And by the way, Jeff, you're right. It was 2016 that we first heard about it.
Yeah.
Oh,
but the fact
I lost a decade.
I think that mostly I find this interesting because we're starting to see ideas come in from outside of Google. That I'm really curious what Google's intention is with this. And
they've said. They did an interview.
What did they say?
They said a couple years ago, like in 2019, one of the people working on this said that they envision Fuchsia for devices that are not phones or laptops. So for everything else. So that was the thinking there.
So that could be a car.
Now
It could be an IoT device. It could be your June oven.
It could be, yeah.
Yeah. And remember,
my June oven runs Android.
That's right. And we talked last week about Google doing a deal with Ford for Android Automotive, but maybe that's also what this would be. Go ahead, Jeff.
So back in the day, the very early days of the web, I remember when Java came out, and wow, you could run this application on various OSs, right through the web. This is like the inverse of that. Here's an OS that can run applications from any number of other OSs, right? So it becomes does it try to become kind of a universal OS?
I think it's mostly a bridge to
what it
solve
is?
the obvious problem of any new operating system, is it has no apps. So
okay. Well,
I think it's more like,
but isn't it even? But it sounds more fundamental than that. It sounds like it could be.
It's like
more
wine.
universal. No,
I mean, when Linux, I think one of the reasons wine existed is because people said, "Well, I'm not going to use Linux unless I can run Microsoft Office," and so wine was designed to scratch that itch. And I think it is kind of a carrot or a chicken and egg problem with any new operating system. So, by the way, whether Starnix will happen is
Right.
This is just an
proposal.
idea. This isn't even a code sample. So, I'm more interested in the fact. Well, the two things. One is because it does point us a little bit in a direction of what they might be doing with Fuchsia, but also just that we're starting to see now, because it's open, a little more Fuchsia activity, which I'm glad to see. It's always bugged me that we've kind of said, okay, there's, we got maybe 4 operating systems. There's Windows, there's Mac, there's iOS, there's Android. Okay, there's 4, and then there's Linux and BSD. So there's 6, but there's no room for any more. The last, operating system that had a shot at being commercial was BOS, almost 30 years ago. And then when Apple decided not to use BOS, but instead Next Step for their Macintoshes, that was the end of BOS. And it was, those of us who liked BOS were really impressed with BOS. It was really, really cool. I'd love to see another look at a modern operating system. I mean, there's things you would do differently now, particularly designed for security, that, in a more modern world, we have newer needs. Lots of. And I presume Fuchsia will address
But isn't that what Apple is trying to do now with? Isn't that what Apple is trying to do now with its bit of a synergy between Mac OS and iPad OS and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, when they announced iOS, when the
people.
iPhone was announced, they said it's really the OS 10 kernel in a phone operating system. I think there's more in common between iOS and Mac OS under the hood. I think you could almost say there's one OS from Apple, designed for different platforms.
Is there a legal issue these days? I'm going back to my early days as well. So let's say that this also works with Mac OS, just for the heck of it. Is that if it doesn't use any Mac core logic, but it's still able to be compatible, is that a problem with copyright or trademark or patents or anything?
I'm sure Apple's lawyers will find a way.
Yeah.
Well, remember the Google Oracle debate was sort of over that, whether
That's what I'm asking. Yeah.
Google could make a Java clone not by taking any of the code, but by just duplicating the programming interface, the API. That's still to be determined, right? They haven't.
It's still not determined.
Yeah, they haven't ruled on that yet, but it doesn't look good, to be honest with you. I don't know. That's an interesting question. Wine on Linux works not by putting any Windows code on Linux, but just by responding to Windows system calls in the way Windows would. So when it requires a bit of a tweaking for every app, but when an app is running under Wine, it thinks it's running under Windows. It's really running on Linux, and anytime it makes a Windows call, Wine intercepts it and says, "Oh yeah, here. You want to open a window? Okay, here." And that's, I think, an interesting way to work. I don't know what the Oracle Google judgment would have, how that would affect Wine, because Wine is kind of doing the same thing. It's imitating Windows APIs. It's actually really more imitating system calls. So, but I don't know.
It becomes a different architectural world.
I remember you said a few minutes ago with.
Ant, you're a little latent, and I don't mean anything bad by that. But go ahead.
I keep freezing over there.
Yeah. Go ahead. Ask your question.
You said that Wine was sort of the way to scratch the itch for the folks in Linux, and I don't know if it even scratched that itch. I mean, granted, it could open a few things here and there, but just how functional was it to be able to get day-to-day done without jumping through a gazillion hoops of wine in the configuration. I hated it.
Yeah, I think it was a transitional technology, and it is now not as important because there's LibreOffice and there's all sorts of. I mean, I think almost anything you want to do, Linux has a great open source alternative to. So, did you try to run?
A long time.
Yeah, it took a long time though. Yeah, did you try to run Photoshop on Linux? Is that what you were doing? Or Lightroom?
No, I didn't try Photoshop. No.
Yeah.
Didn't try Photoshop. I remember just trying to fight with spreadsheets.
Oh, yeah, it was hard. Yeah. And I don't think it's as important as it used to be. Honestly, I think I don't ever feel like I can't do anything I want to do in Linux. Probably, in many cases, better than I could do it on Windows. But I'm a little bit biased in that regard.